My phone started vibrating at 5:30 a.m. The sharp, unnatural buzz that only happens when something is wrong. No one calls at that hour with good news. For a second I lay there staring at the ceiling trying to place the sound inside a dream. Then I saw my brother's name glowing on the screen. I answered on the fourth ring. His voice was steady. Too steady. "Mom died last night," he said. No preamble. No softness. Just a statement like he was reading off a weather alert. My body went cold before my mind could catch up. What? She passed in her sleep. It was quick. A pause. Then almost as an afterthought, "I'm handling everything. You don't need to come. And just so you know, you get nothing." The words landed harder than the first sentence. You get nothing. No, I'm sorry. Not this is hard. Just logistics. Just exclusion. I sat up slowly in bed, the phone pressed to my ear, trying to make sense of the air in the room. And that's when I heard the familiar scrape of ceramic against wood. I turned my head. My mother was sitting at the small kitchen table across from me, wrapped in her blue robe, stirring sugar into her coffee like she did every morning. She looked up, raised her eyebrows at my expression, and mouthed, "Who is it?" I couldn't speak for a second. "Are you there?" my brother asked, impatience creeping in. I stared at my mother. She took a careful sip, completely alive, completely unaware that she had apparently died in her sleep. "What hospital?" I asked, finally, my voice steadier than I felt. Silence. Just a beat too long. "She didn't want a scene," he said quickly. "It's already handled." Before I could ask anything else, the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly while still looking at my mother. She was watching me now. "What's wrong?" I realized then that the call hadn't felt like grief. Felt like a test. I've always been the early riser in the family. Even as a teenager, I liked knowing where things stood before the rest of the house woke up. Bills paid. Coffee made. Day mapped out. Order has always felt safer than emotion. At 38, I work as a senior project manager for a regional construction firm. It isn't glamorous, but it's steady. I oversee budgets, timelines, contracts, moving parts that only work if someone is paying attention. I'm good at paying attention. I know where every dollar goes, what every signature means, and which details can quietly unravel everything if ignored. My mortgage is manageable. My retirement account is boring and healthy. I don't carry credit card balances. I don't gamble on investments I don't understand. Stability isn't exciting, but it's dependable. And dependable has always been my currency. Mom moved into the small in-law suite attached to my house 3 years ago after her second fall. It was supposed to be temporary. Most arrangements like that are. But temporary turned into routine, and routine turned into comfort. I handle her medical appointments, refill prescriptions, review insurance statements, and keep copies of every document in a labeled folder in my office. Not because she's incapable, but because I've learned paperwork waits for no one. My brother Daniel lives 3 states away. He calls himself an entrepreneur. That word has covered everything from flipping used cars to launching a protein powder brand that lasted 6 months. He has charm, I'll give him that. People like him quickly. He talks in big arcs and future tense. Something is always about to take off. What rarely takes off is his credit score. Over the years there have been quiet rescues. A loan here. Cosign lease there. Mom is dipping into savings because he just needs a little bridge. I used to argue. Eventually I stopped. Not because I agreed, but because arguing didn't change the pattern. Daniel handles holidays. He sends dramatic flower arrangements on Mother's Day and posts filtered photos online with captions about gratitude. I handle the unphotographed things. The insurance claims. The cracked water heater. The cardiology follow-up calls. We've never said it out loud, but there's always been an unspoken division. He performs love and I maintain it. That morning, standing in my kitchen with my very much alive mother sipping coffee, I understood something with a clarity that felt almost physical. If Daniel had called to say she was dead, it wasn't confusion. It was a strategy. Daniel was born 3 years after me, loud and smiling, and already certain the room belonged to him. My earliest memories of him are bright, him standing on the coffee table at 4 performing for our parents' friends, soaking up applause like oxygen. I was the one clearing glasses before they tipped over. Some families divide roles accidentally. Ours did it with consistency. Daniel was the golden child. Not because he was cruel or malicious, at least not then, but because he was easy to adore. Teachers called him charismatic. Coaches called him a natural leader. He could talk his way out of late assignments and into second chances. When he forgot things, it was shrugged off as creativity. When I forgot things, it was a lapse in responsibility. By middle school, I was the one checking due dates on the fridge calendar. By high school, I was the one reminding Mom when the electric bill was past due. Dad used to joke that I was the little accountant, and I wore the title like a badge. If something needed fixing, I fixed it. If something was broken, I stayed late and figured it out. Daniel figured things would work out. In college, the pattern deepened. I worked part-time in an administrative office building spreadsheets for professors who barely remembered my name. Daniel switched majors twice and started a clothing brand that never shipped more than 50 shirts. When tuition came up short, Mom took out a small personal loan for him. I picked up extra shifts. After Dad passed, the dynamic calcified. Daniel cried openly at the funeral. People hugged him longer. I handled the paperwork for the death certificate, called the insurance company, and sat with Mom at the dining room table going through account numbers. I remember writing figures on a yellow legal pad, while Daniel talked about how hard it was to process loss. It was hard. For all of us. But the grief I learned didn't pause deadlines. The first time Daniel asked Mom for a short-term loan, I didn't object. The second time I suggested a repayment plan. The third time I noticed there wasn't one. Mom would say things like, "He just needs a little push," or, "You know how creative he is." Creative meant unpredictable. Unpredictable meant expensive. When Daniel's restaurant partnership collapsed 6 months and investors gone equipment repossessed, Mom withdrew from her retirement account to help him reset. I remember standing in her kitchen explaining early withdrawal penalties while Daniel stared at his phone. "It's temporary," he said. "I just need breathing room." The breathing room has a way of expanding. I started keeping quiet records then. Not to weaponize them, just to understand them. Dates, amounts, transfers. I never confronted Daniel with a ledger, but I kept one in my head. Not out of resentment, out of self-preservation. There's a difference. Daniel learned that money moved when he applied pressure. I learned that money moved when I planned for it. At family gatherings, he told stories about future ventures. Mom glowed. I refilled my drinks. If something broke, the garbage disposal, the Wi-Fi router hinged on the back gate, I fixed it without being asked. It became easier than asking why I was the one who noticed. By our 30s, the labels had hardened. Daniel was the dreamer. I was the dependable one. And dependable in our family came with an expectation: you handle it. When Mom slipped on the porch steps 3 winters ago, Daniel flew in for 2 days, posted a photo from her hospital room, and flew out. I rearranged my work schedule for 6 weeks, installed railings, and moved her into my spare suite when the stairs became too much. No one said thank you in a grand way. It wasn't that kind of family. It was understood that I would step in. That's what I did. But what Daniel learned that I didn't fully grasp until that 5:30 a.m. call was that stepping in could be interpreted as stepping aside. That handling things quietly made space for louder claims. "You fixed the plumbing." "He frames the house." So when he told me without hesitation that Mom had died and I got nothing, it wasn't as random as it sounded. It was an escalation of a pattern that had been rehearsing for decades. My mother set her mug down, slowly studying my face the way she used to when I came home late in high school. "What did your brother want?" she asked. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat. Up close, I could see the faint crease between her eyebrows, the one that only showed when she sensed something unsettled. She looked very much alive. Annoyingly healthy for a woman who had apparently passed in her sleep. "He said you died last night," I said evenly. She blinked. "Once. Then twice." "That's not funny." "I didn't think it was." Her hand hovered over the sugar bowl before settling back on the table. "Why would he say that?" "That's what I'd like to know." For a moment we just listened to the refrigerator hum. The ordinariness of the sound felt surreal. "Did he call you yesterday?" I asked. She hesitated. It was small, but I saw it. "He stopped by last week," she said carefully. "On his way back from a conference." "A conference?" That was new. "And he wanted to talk about paperwork," she continued. "Estate things. He said it would be easier if everything was streamlined." "Streamlined?" I kept my expression neutral. "Streamlined how?" "Oh, you know." She waved her hand vaguely. Putting the house in his name early. Avoiding probate. He said it would save everyone trouble. There it was. And what did you say? I told him I wasn't planning on going anywhere. She attempted a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. He said it wasn't about that. Just planning ahead. Did you sign anything? No, a beat. He brought some papers. I didn't like how rushed it felt. That word stayed with me. Rushed. Daniel was many things, but being patient with paperwork wasn't one of them. If he was pushing documents, it meant urgency. And urgency usually meant money. Did he say anything about me? I asked. Mom looked down at her mug. He mentioned that you're very busy. That you probably wouldn't want to deal with legal details. I almost laughed. I handle your insurance claims, I said quietly. I deal with your pharmacy. I manage your property taxes. I know that, she said quickly. I told him that. But she hadn't told him to leave. She'd entertained the conversation long enough for him to think there was an opening. I leaned back in my chair, replaying the phone call in my head. Mom died last night. You get nothing. The phrasing had been so final. So logistical. It didn't sound like someone who had just lost a parent. It sounded like someone rehearsing a transfer. Mom, I said gently. Did he ask where you kept your original will? Her silence answered before she did. Yes. The refrigerator hummed again, steady and indifferent. That was the moment confusion shifted into something sharper. Daniel hadn't been mistaken. He'd been preparing. I waited until Mom went back to her crossword puzzle before I stepped into my office and closed the door. Panic doesn't help, you think. Process does. I pulled up the county probate website first. It was outdated, clunky, and clearly built sometime in the early 2000s, but the search function worked. I typed in my mother's full legal name and pressed enter. No recent filings. No death certificate. No open estate. I knew there wouldn't be. I had just watched her complain about the crossword's Tuesday difficulty level. Still seeing the blank search results steadied me. Then I called. The probate clerk who answered sounded like she had been drinking lukewarm coffee since dawn. I kept my voice calm and professional. I'm calling to verify whether any recent filings have been made under my mother's name, I said. There may have been some confusion. There was a pause while she typed. Keys clicking, papers shuffling. No death certificate on file, she said finally. No estate case opened. Any property transfers initiated? Another pause. There was an inquiry last week, she said. About joint tenancy paperwork and deed transfer procedures. My pulse ticked up, but my voice didn't. And who made that inquiry? She hesitated. We can't release detailed information without authorization. But the caller identified himself as Daniel Foster. Said he was her son. Of course he did. Was anything filed? I asked. No, ma'am. Just a request for procedural information. Procedural information. I thanked her and hung up and sat back in my chair. Daniel had not filed a death certificate. He had not opened an estate. But he had been researching how to move assets. Specifically how to transfer property. He had told me Mom was dead before taking any official step to make it true on paper. That detail mattered. I opened the folder on my computer where I keep scanned copies of Mom's documents that will deem insurance policies, medical directives. Everything dated, everything backed up twice. I reread the will slowly. It was straightforward. Equal division between her two children. No conditions. No drama. If that had changed, it would require her signature, witnesses, and proper notarization. It wouldn't happen casually. I picked up my phone again, this time calling the title office that handled Mom's home when she refinanced years ago. Has anyone inquired about transferring the deed on the Foster property recently? I asked. Another pause. Another keyboard. Yes, the woman replied. Daniel Foster requested guidance on adding himself to the title. Was my mother present? No. He said he was helping her prepare paperwork. Helping. Did he submit anything? Not, just asked about required forms and notarization. I thanked her and ended the call. Daniel had been mapping out the route. Joint tenancy would allow him survivorship rights. If he were added to the deed, probate would be simplified for him. If Mom died, ownership could shift seamlessly. And if I were caught off guard by a sudden announcement, there would be pressure, sympathy, momentum. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. The 5:30 a.m. call wasn't grief. It was reconnaissance. He wanted to see if I would accept the narrative without checking it. If I would freeze. If I would defer. Instead, I had documentation. And Daniel had curiosity. There's a difference between asking how something works and filing it. But asking is how you prepare to move quickly. He had asked, which meant he was planning to act. What I didn't yet know was how far he'd already gone. Mom fell asleep in her recliner that afternoon, the television murmuring low in the background. I told myself I was only going to double-check one thing. Her laptop sat on the small desk near the window, exactly where she always left it. She isn't careless with her passwords. I set them up for her. I logged in gently like I was entering a quiet room. At first I searched her email inbox for anything from Daniel in the past 2 weeks. There were a few messages linked to articles about estate planning made simple, a forwarded video about avoiding probate delays. Harmless on the surface. Almost responsible. Then I opened her drafts folder. There was one unsent message. Subject line. With heavy hearts. My throat tightened. Clicked it. The body of the email was short and formal. It is with heavy hearts that we announce the passing of Margaret Foster, who left us peacefully in her sleep. It went on to mention a private family service. It instructed recipients not to call, that arrangements have been handled. Handled. At the bottom it was signed, Daniel Foster. Not we. Not the family. Just him. I scrolled further. Attached to the draft was a PDF. My pulse pounded once hard before I opened it. The document was titled, Last Will and Testament Amendment. The formatting was sloppy. Margins slightly off. Legal phrasing copied from somewhere online. It stated that all real property and liquid assets were to transfer solely to Daniel Foster, in recognition of his ongoing support and proximity. Proximity. I lived 20 feet from her bedroom. The signature line bore my mother's name in shaky cursive. Too shaky. I know her handwriting. I've watched it on birthday cards and prescription forms for decades. This version looked traced unevenly in places where her hand would normally be fluid. The witness lines were blank. No notary stamp. No date. Just a scanned signature. I stared at it for a long time, my breathing slow and deliberate. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't even desperation in the messy, impulsive sense I was used to from Daniel. This was premeditated. He had drafted an obituary before she died. He had drafted a will amendment removing me. He had scanned it into her computer. He had prepared a narrative. I scrolled back to the email body. There was a final paragraph I hadn't noticed at first. In lieu of flowers, please respect the family's privacy as we navigate estate matters. Estate matters. He had written the ending before the event. For a moment I felt something sharp and hot rise in my chest. Not grief. Not fear. Something closer to clarity. I closed the document carefully and reopened it, this time checking the file properties. Created 3 days ago. Modified yesterday evening. The night before the call. He had planned to press send. Maybe after confirming I wouldn't contest it. Maybe after testing whether I'd accept his 5:30 a.m. announcement without resistance. I shut the laptop slowly and sat back. My mother was asleep in the next room, breathing steadily. Alive. Unaware that her death had been formatted, drafted, and saved for distribution. The worst part wasn't the forged signature. It was confidence. Daniel believed I would find out too late. He believed momentum would carry him. And for the first time in years I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. I didn't wake my mother. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't send a single text. Instead I made a list. There's something grounding about writing things down. It turns outrage into action. At the top of the page I wrote one word: attorney. We had used a local estate lawyer years ago when Mom first drafted her will after Dad passed. His office was still in the same brick building downtown. I called as soon as they opened and requested the earliest available appointment. I didn't dramatize it. I said we needed to review existing documents and discuss recent concerns about unauthorized amendments. The receptionist offered Friday at 10. I took it. Then I printed copies of everything I had found in the draft obituary, the forged amendment screenshots of file properties. I placed them neatly into a folder alongside Mom's original will and deed. When Mom woke from her nap, I told her only what she needed to know. Daniel's been looking into transferring the house, I said gently. I think we should review your paperwork with Mr. Halpern, just to make sure everything's protected. She looked embarrassed more than alarmed. Do you think he meant something by it? I think we shouldn't assume anything, I replied. That was true in one sense. In another, I had already assumed everything. Over the next 2 days, Daniel texted twice. Casual messages. How's Mom? We should talk about planning soon. I responded politely and briefly. No confrontation. No accusation. Just acknowledgement. Inside, though, something had shifted. For years, my instinct had been to absorb the disruption, smooth it over, avoid escalation. That reflex hummed in the background, now urging me to call him and demand an explanation. I didn't. Anger would give him something to react to. Calm would give him nothing. On Thursday evening, I called him. Mom and I are meeting with her estate attorney tomorrow, I said. You should join us. It'll be good to clarify everything. He paused just a fraction too long. Clarify what? Planning, I answered. You said it was important. Another pause. Then a chuckle. Sure. I'll be there. After I hung up, I felt no triumph. No fear. Just steadiness. If he wanted this handled, we would handle it properly. In daylight. With witnesses. The attorney's conference room smelled faintly of paper and lemon cleaner, the kind of neutral scent designed to calm people who are about to argue. Mom sat between Daniel and me at the polished oak table, her purse folded neatly in her lap. She looked small in that space but alert. Daniel arrived 10 minutes late, smiling like this was a brunch reservation instead of a legal meeting. He wore a blazer he probably bought for networking events and carried a slim leather folder under his arm. Good to see everyone, he said lightly, bending to kiss Mom's cheek. I'm glad we're finally getting organized. Organized. Mr. Halpern entered a moment later, gray-haired and precise as ever. He greeted us politely and sat at the head of the table. Margaret, he began, your daughter mentioned you wanted to review your estate documents. Yes, Mom said, glancing at Daniel. Just to make sure everything's in order. Daniel cleared his throat. I've been encouraging her to simplify things, he said smoothly. Avoid probate delays. Make sure her wishes are respected. He slid his leather folder onto the table and opened it with deliberate calm. Inside were printed documents. Copies of something. I drafted a proposed amendment. He continued, looking at Mr. Halpern rather than me. Just to streamline asset transfer. Mom's comfortable with it. I felt the shift in the room, subtle but real. The way language can position someone before facts are examined. Streamline. Respect wishes. Avoid delays. On the speakerphone in the center of the table, my aunt's voice crackled faintly. Daniel had dialed her in before we arrived, he'd said. So everyone stays informed. Transparency framed as courtesy. Daniel's been very proactive, my aunt said warmly. It's good someone's thinking ahead. Proactive. I kept my hands folded in front of me, breathing evenly. Mr. Halpern adjusted his glasses. Margaret, have you signed any new documents recently? Mom looked at Daniel. He showed me something. I didn't sign it. Daniel's smile didn't falter. She was considering it. I just wanted professional confirmation that it makes sense. Makes sense. He pushed a printed page toward the attorney. I recognized the formatting immediately, the same uneven margins and the same copied legal phrasing. But here in clean black ink it looked more official than it had on a laptop screen. You'll see, Daniel continued calmly. It reflects Mom's wishes to consolidate ownership. Especially given proximity and involvement. Proximity. I almost admired the repetition. The room grew heavier by degrees. My aunt murmured something approving. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair as if the hardest part was already done. He wasn't sweating. He wasn't defensive. He believed this was persuasive. He believed momentum was on his side. And for a moment in that quiet conference room with the speakerphone humming and papers sliding across polished wood, I understood how easily a narrative can harden if no one interrupts it. Mr. Halpern began reading. Mr. Halpern read the amendment once, then again, more slowly. He didn't react immediately. He simply placed the paper flat on the table and folded his hands. Daniel, he said calmly, when was this drafted? Earlier this week, Daniel replied. After Mom and I discussed simplifying things. And this signature? the attorney asked, tapping the page lightly. Daniel's confidence flickered for the first time. Mom signed it. I scanned it so we could review it digitally. Mr. Halpern turned to my mother. Margaret, did you sign this document? Mom looked down at the page. Her brow furrowed. I don't remember signing this. Daniel shifted in his chair. You did. At the kitchen table. I told you we needed to get ahead of things. Get ahead of what? The attorney asked evenly. Daniel hesitated. Future complications. Mr. Halpern adjusted his glasses again. This document is not valid, he said plainly. There are no witness signatures. No notary seal. No date. Even if Margaret had signed it, it would not supersede her existing will. Daniel opened his mouth and closed it. The attorney continued. More importantly, Margaret has not filed a death certificate, nor has any estate been opened. The air shifted. Daniel blinked. Why would you check that? Because, Mr. Halpern said calmly, your sister informed us that you contacted her at 5:30 a.m. claiming your mother had passed away. My aunt's voice crackled sharply over the speakerphone. What? Daniel's face was drained of color. That was a misunderstanding. Was it? I asked quietly. All eyes turned to him. Mr. Halpern's voice remained steady. Announcing someone's death without basis while simultaneously preparing to alter asset distribution is not a misunderstanding. It raises serious concerns. Mom's hands tightened around her purse strap. Daniel, she said softly. Why would you tell your sister I was dead? He laughed once too quickly. I was trying to prepare her. I thought. You said I got nothing, I said. Silence. The words hung in the room like something physical. Mr. Halpern slid the document back toward Daniel. Forging a signature on a will amendment is a criminal offense. Circulating a false death announcement in connection with asset transfer could compound that. I didn't circulate anything, Daniel snapped. Not yet, I said. His eyes met mine then, and for the first time since he'd walked in he looked uncertain. Mom straightened in her chair. There was no frailty in her voice when she spoke. I am not dead, she said clearly. I am not confused. And I did not ask you to remove your sister from my will. The statement settled over the table with a finality Daniel hadn't anticipated. My aunt cleared her throat over the speaker. Daniel, what is going on? He ran a hand through his hair. The polished confidence was gone, now replaced with something frantic around the edges. I was trying to protect Mom, he said. You don't understand how complicated probate can be. It's only complicated, Mr. Halpern replied, when someone attempts to circumvent it. Daniel looked at me again, searching for something. Agreement, softness, retreat. He found none. For years he had relied on momentum, on charm, on the assumption that I would absorb the discomfort to keep the peace. There was no peace to keep here. Mr. Halpern turned to my mother. Margaret, if you'd like, we can reaffirm your existing will today. With proper witnesses. With proper documentation. Yes, she said firmly. Daniel pushed back from the table. This is ridiculous, he muttered. No, I said quietly. It's paperwork. The word landed differently now. Daniel's gaze dropped to the invalid amendment in front of him. The room was still empty except for the faint hum of the speakerphone and the scratch of the attorney's pen as he prepared new documents. The narrative Daniel had drafted about death exclusion inevitability had collapsed under fluorescent lighting and procedural clarity. He hadn't expected resistance. He hadn't expected documentation. And he certainly hadn't expected our mother to look him in the eye and say she was still here. In that conference room surrounded by witnesses and legal language, the performance ended. All that remained were facts. And they weren't on his side. When the new documents were signed and witnessed, I waited until the attorney stepped out to make copies. Daniel was still standing near the window, jaw tight, staring at the parking lot like he could will the last hour to reverse itself. I'm not going to argue with you, I said calmly. He didn't turn around. You already did. No, I replied. I verified. That made him look at me. For years, I continued keeping my voice, even I handled things quietly. Bills. Repairs. Logistics. I thought staying calm meant keeping the family steady. But calm doesn't mean invisible. He opened his mouth, but I kept going. From now on, anything involving Mom's estate goes through her attorney. Not phone calls at dawn. Not drafts on laptops. not private simplifications. If you have a concern, you bring it here. Mom watched us both silent but attentively. And one more thing, I said. There won't be any more financial rescues. Not from her. Not from me. His expression hardened. So that's it. That's clarity, I answered. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was final. Daniel didn't stay after the meeting ended. He left without hugging Mom, without looking at me again, his leather folder tucked stiffly under his arm like evidence he no longer knew how to use it. By the time I got home that afternoon, my phone had 3 missed calls and 2 messages from him. The first text was short. You blindsided me. The second was longer. I was trying to protect Mom from complications. You made it look like I was committing a crime. I read them both twice before responding. I asked for verification. That's all. He didn't reply after that. Not that day. Mom was quiet that evening. She sat at the kitchen table longer than usual, her coffee untouched. Finally she sighed. I never thought he'd do something like that, she said. I don't think he thought of it as something like that, I answered carefully. I think he thought he was getting ahead. She nodded, slowly absorbing the distinction. The following week we returned to Mr. Halpern's office. This time there was no tension. No speakerphone. Just signatures done properly, witness properly, filed properly. Mom reaffirmed her original will to equal division unchanged. We added a clause requiring any future amendments to be executed only in the attorney's presence. Documentation isn't emotional. It's preventative. Daniel called once more 3 days later. His voice was clipped. So you just don't trust me now? This isn't about trust, I said. It's about the process. He exhaled sharply. You always have to make everything procedural. I'll make it clear, I replied. There was a pause on the line. I could almost hear him recalibrating, searching for an angle that no longer existed. You're turning Mom against me, he said finally. No, I said. You tried to turn paperwork into leverage. That didn't work. He hung up without saying goodbye. After that the messages slowed, then stopped. He didn't visit that month. Or the next. On social media he posted photos from networking events and motivational quotes about resilience. There was no mention of family. No vague references to betrayal. Just carefully curated momentum. Mom missed him in the abstract way mothers do, even when disappointed. He'll come around, she said once. Maybe, I answered. But something fundamental had shifted. For years Daniel operated with the assumption that I would avoid escalation at any cost. That I would step back rather than challenge him publicly. That I would absorb discomfort so the family image stayed intact. Now he knew I wouldn't. He'd tested the boundary at 5:30 a.m. expecting silence. He got documentation instead. Financially nothing changed for me. I hadn't been counting on inheritance. I have my own stability and my own plans. But leverage had changed hands. Daniel no longer controlled the narrative. He couldn't imply decisions had already been made. He couldn't float amendments privately. He couldn't create urgency around a fabricated crisis. Everything had to move through the process. And the process is slow. Months passed without incident. No more simplifications. No more early morning calls. Just occasional neutral check-ins from him are brief and transactional. How's Mom? Fine. He never apologized. Not directly. But he also never brought up estate planning again. The power he thought he could quietly claim dissolved under fluorescent lights and witness signatures. Not dramatically. Not with shouting. Just with exposure. And sometimes that's consequence enough. I used to think inheritance was about money. About numbers on paper. Property lines. Accounts balanced and divided. Now I understand it's about something quieter and more dangerous to control. Who gets to decide what happens next? Who gets to shape the story when someone else can't correct it? Daniel didn't wait for our mother to die. He waited for an opening. He assumed that urgency would overwhelm the process. That emotion would outrun verification. That I would hesitate long enough for momentum to carry him forward. For years I hesitated in smaller ways. I avoided confrontation. I translated chaos into spreadsheets and called it peacekeeping. I thought staying calm meant staying out of the spotlight. But calm doesn't mean passive. Calm can mean prepared. That 5:30 a.m. call wasn't about death. It was about testing whether I would step aside. Whether I would accept a version of reality simply because it was delivered with confidence. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I verified. There's a difference. My mother is still here. She still stirs sugar into her coffee every morning. Her will is filed properly. Her wishes are documented in ink that doesn't tremble. And Daniel? He learned that paperwork tells the truth eventually. He called to tell me I would get nothing. What he didn't understand was that I was never asking him for anything in the first place.